It's T-Lore, and today I'm going to show you how I paint all of my CNC laser cut accessories that I make. So these are all made out of acrylic. It's the same material, I've just used a different color for each one, and then for two of these I have left the paper masking on, and these two I did what's called a dish soap masking, where you put a mixture of dish soap and water on ahead of time, and then it rinses off as soon as you're done cutting. So if we look at these ones that I left the paper masking on, you can see there's kind of a dust on them. If I just wipe my finger on it, you can see that it leaves quite a bit of residue on there that we'll have to clean off later. So I'm just going to take my rag, wipe off all that extra dust. Even though it's masked, you still have to clean it to try and get all the soot and dust off of it before you paint it. I already did that with this one here, so we don't have to worry about it. And then for the dish soap masking, I actually picked one intentionally, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see it, but you can kind of see like a smoky haze around the 4 and the 5 on this one, and that's where the dish soap masking kind of blew off or was a little bit too much water and not enough soap in that area. And that tends to happen on the dish soap masking. You get these little blotches, but you'll see where that actually doesn't end up mattering too much with the entire process that we do. So what I have here is a really cheap acrylic paint that is 8 ounces of it. This was like $1 or $2. And then I have this much more expensive, like a premium one, 0.6 ounces was $3.50. So this is a lot nicer. You still have to shake it up and use it, but it is a lot thicker and creamier kind of paint. And you'll see how those go on a little bit differently. This one, I used a Hobby Lobby paint marker. Doesn't really matter where you get it from as long as you're looking for alcohol-based pigmented ink. And in fact, this one has like a shake rattle in it, but I've also refilled it with an alcohol ink bottle. So this is 4 ounces, and this is about $20 for this. So again, this is pretty expensive, but if you think about it, it's kind of in the same price range as this acrylic because of the fact that it's a 4-ounce bottle. And it even has like a shaker bottle in it to help mix it that you can hear as well. So that's just like my refill. And then I also have these oil pens, which is oil-based paint. And I don't really use these, so I don't know the price on these a whole lot, and you'll see why I don't use them here in a little bit. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to paint on the white acrylic that we have. All right, and I'm going to just put a little bit of paint here on this is just a big slab of granite. It doesn't really matter what you use. But you can see it's kind of thick. I'm using just a cheap brush because we're just going to go ahead and just flood fill over that. It's masked, so we don't have to worry about that, right? So I'm just going to fill it all in here. And it's kind of a gloopy kind of paint. Keep refilling my paintbrush. Again, this is a pretty cheap paintbrush, so I'm not terribly worried about it. And you'll notice that in some of the smaller details, there's actually like these little black spots. Those are bubbles where it's not getting painted. So we'll go in here and we'll just fill it all in with paint. And I have to keep going back to some previous places where the bubbles have come out and they just leave like a blank space where it's not getting painted. Alright, so I have completely covered that. I'm not going to paint this piece with it. We'll just go ahead and do the inner piece with that one. The big disadvantage to this is that it says let dry 1 hour between coats. So now that I've put that on there, I can't do anything with it for an hour. So we'll let that sit. Now we have this Army Painter paint as well, and this I've shaken it up. It has a nice little needle applicator and it comes out really quick, so we're gonna just kind of dab it into the spots here. Again, this is just a different kind of acrylic paint, and I'm just pushing it into the different grooves that I've cut into this. And I'm not trying to get it perfect because I can still come back with a brush and just brush it off. Alright, so I got it pretty close. There's quite a bit of paint on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get another brush. And again, I'm not too worried about the quality of the brush here because it's masked, so we don't have to worry about it too much. I'm just going to fill in all those little gaps with these big blobs of it here. Alright, so that should be completely covered at this point. So it doesn't have on here how long you should wait in between each coat, but I'm going to assume that it's pretty similar in timing. Now, you will see some people that will tell you that you can take this paint and then we'll brush it into the one here. Alright, so we've brushed it into the one. And then what you can do is you can just come back and wipe it. Alright, so I've wiped it out, but you can see I'm still getting streaks of it coming out of that one itself. And so there we go. I painted it, but now I have all this paint all over my fingers. So I don't really recommend that unless you've got just like a little tiny bit that you're using. But you'll see why I use the technique that I do in a little bit here. So now that these have been taken care of, I'd like to let them dry before we peel that masking off. And while we do that, I'm going to set these paints off to the side, and I'm going to take this one here and I'm going to paint it with the paint pen. So you just shake it a little bit, and we're going to go in, and if you just click it just a little tiny bit, push it down, it starts to get the ink flowing, and so you can get it coming out, and it makes this obnoxious squeaking sound, which I'm sure you can hear. But once you get the ink flowing, it flows very quickly. You can see how quickly I'm able to do this because I'm not having to refill my brush, and it flows. It's a lot looser of a liquid. Alright, and you might see a few bubbles, but I'm not terribly worried about those, and you'll see why in just a minute. So I blow on it lightly. You can even shake it a little bit, and there's a couple of drops on here that are still pretty wet, but you can see just like that, it's already mostly dry. So in just a matter of a few seconds, the paint is dry. So that's a really helpful thing. Alright, so for the next one here, I'm going to use my oil paint. I'm going to do the same thing. Now this one has been around a little while, so it may not work as well, but we're going to go ahead and try it. There it goes. So this is oil-based paint, which is probably the most permanent of all of them. And again, I really enjoy using the paint markers for these because it comes right out. You're able to fill it in really quickly. Alright, now this one says it doesn't have a time on here for how long it takes. So we'll blow on it, and it should dry pretty quickly. So while these take on the order of an hour, these are going to take probably less than a minute to dry. So while these are still drying, I'm going to pull out an extra accessory here. And this is polishing cloth or polishing paper that you can get. And it's a very fine paper that has a rating on it for how much it can do, like a sandpaper. So I think this is like 10,000 grit or something to that level. So it's a very high grit of sandpaper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet a small area of this. And because I'm right-handed, I tend to work from the left to the right, just so I'm not working on top of areas that I've already got. And when it's no longer shiny, I'm going to take my acrylic that has the alcohol ink on it, and I'm just going to rub it a couple of times on this polishing paper. And then rub it on the dry part, and there, it's painted. Now, do you remember that blurriness that we had with the 4 and the 5? This is that exact same piece, and I'm looking at it in the light, and that fog has gone away. So that laser fog that you get sometimes when the masking fails, it goes away in this process. So that's another reason I really like this, is if there's any mistakes or flaws like that, this is going to be able to just remove that right away. So just like that, I've now painted my piece, I've polished it off, and it's ready, it's done. So in the space of this video, I've gone from a freshly cut piece to fully painted. These acrylic pieces are still drying, and then this oil-based one, we're going to try and do something a little bit different with that one. So I just have like an old t-shirt here, nothing special. I'm going to try and put some rubbing alcohol on it and try to wipe it off. And you can see that some of it will wipe off because it's still kind of fresh, so it hasn't finished drying all the way, and I'm trying to wipe off a lot of the areas. The problem is, if I do it fast enough to where it's not dried all the way, it'll actually pull it out of all the wells that's engraved. If I were to let this sit for about 24 hours and let it really dry out, I would have to do some serious polishing to get that off. So it's a very permanent solution. It works all right with masking, but what you'll see with these when I pull the masking off is that the masking actually doesn't protect it all the way. So I got a little bit of extra paint on this one. This is the advantage to acrylic, is that it wipes right off. So all that paint that I had on the edge, I just wiped it right off. Now, some of this acrylic has already dried in some of the thinner spots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, this is pretty much a very dull knife, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start peeling the masking off. So we'll take the masking off here. Alright, once I get it started, it's a lot easier to come off. Alright, so here's the masking coming off. Now, here's the first problem with masking. So I got the masking paper off, and that's fine. This is why I hate masking. So, in the little tiny P here, the 6, the 8, the 9, and the 0 all still have a tiny piece of paper in there that you have to go and peel off. So now I have to sit here and fiddle with getting all of this masking off. And in the meantime, I'm spreading the ink around a little bit because it is still a little bit wet. I did rush that a little bit. Fully admit that. Okay. So I'm going to sit here and peel off all the masking, and I'm going to try not to spread the paint around. It definitely filled in all those spots. This is, again, the cheap acrylic, but you've got to be careful not to get it everywhere else. Now, the biggest problem with this stuff is, I'm not even going to get that little tiny P off. So I'm just going to smear a little bit of it on purpose. I intentionally did that because now we'll see how easy it is to clean up. So just like I did with the alcohol ink and the oil ink, we're going to take some rubbing alcohol and we're going to just wipe it out. And this is where it gets really frustrating, is because doesn't seem like anything that you can do is going to keep that stuff from spreading. So I'm going to even try the same process here and try and wipe it. Yeah, and so I'll take the masking off here just to be comparing here. So you can see that it still smears and it's starting to pull the paint out of the pocket as well. So the acrylics are just, they're really washable, which is not what we want in this application. So when I use the rubbing alcohol, it smears right out. I'll try it again here. Yeah, and it kind of leaves a kind of a smeary finish. Let's see if I can get it to show. So it looks okay, but if I were to get something like some water, this is just regular old water, and pour a little tiny dab on it. It's going to be tough to do with this big jug, but alright, there we go. I poured a dab on there. soak up some of the extra. I want to show you what water does. If you're ever worried about water, so like rain, or somebody spills a drink, or you know, your hands are sweaty or something like that, you'll notice very quickly this ink starts to bleed. So acrylics will wash off even with just plain water. So that's why I don't like to use acrylics, is because all it takes is just a drop of rain or something like that, and then your colors have started to smear and to wear off. So I avoid using acrylic when I can. The premium acrylic is going to have the same problem, so I'm going to go ahead and peel this one off. I'm not going to do all the intermediate masking, but I'll peel this off. And while it's definitely a brighter finish right now, go ahead and do a little bit more rubbing alcohol. I'm waiting for the shiny spots to go away because those are almost too much. They'll get up there and start peeling off the... Alright. So you can see again it starts to pull the paint out of where you've engraved just because of how washable the acrylic is. The reason why it works so well with the alcohol ink is that it's not very washable. So you're just able to, it's not pulling it out of the ink wells or the grooves that we've engraved, and it's not smearing it around. So it doesn't take much, and we're not using it in contact with the alcohol ink long enough for it to start pulling it out. So if I were to take this and I just poured some rubbing alcohol on it, and then very quickly dabbed it up, see, it didn't smear at all, because it takes a little bit longer for the rubbing alcohol to actually break down the ink and loosen it up, because the big difference is that this is paint that's water based. So that means when the water gets in there, it's going to pick up the pigment again. And if I pour water on here, just like I did with the last one, it's pigment that's alcohol based. And so when the alcohol dries, the pigment is just left. Like there's nothing that's going to pull that off unless you really soak it for a long time to try and get that on there. So it's sitting in water right now, and I'm going to try and get in here and smear it, and it's not smearing at all. It's still nice and bright, clean. So that's why I like using the alcohol inks. So let's come back to this oil base. Now that I've wiped it off and it's had a chance to dry a little bit, we'll try polishing it again. So everything that's on here is very dry. Like this is not just wiping off with my hand. Alright, so I'm trying to get the light on this a little bit better. And it's just not the same level of brightness as the alcohol inks are. And to even show you that, I will paint one of these numbers here. And you can compare it to how it all turned out. So I'm going to take it, just quickly wipe it off. You can see very clearly the difference in brightness between the oil base and the alcohol base. And again, I can get it that bright, but by the time you let the oil-based paint sit, it's not going to end up as easy to remove as the alcohol ink is. You got to use something that's a solvent for oil, something like an oil-based solvent, and then you have to clean that solvent off because you don't want to leave an oily residue on your pieces. So really, there's not a whole lot of difference in between the two acrylics. If you're using it in an application where you're not worried about water getting all over it, then you could use either one. Just notice that you're going to get a little bit better, brighter colors out of a more premium acrylic, but you can definitely use the cheap stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. And then the alcohol-based inks I found is just the easiest and fastest way to paint. And if you're worried about colors, well, I'm just going to grab a couple of different random colors. There's different colors that you can get. And if you just want to get one of these paint pens or even just paint it by hand, you can do that, and you can just get bottles of the alcohol ink that you can use. So that's my recommendation. It works really well with the dish soap method, and honestly, it means you don't have to try and peel a whole bunch of masking off, especially the smaller stuff. And also with the masking, you'll notice if you look at the little tiny writing here, some of this smaller text just doesn't show through because of how much detail the laser can really put out. It's on for such a short time to try and get through the masking paper that it really just doesn't work the same as if you don't have that masking on there and you just put the dish soap on there. It really just keeps the smoke from building up around where you're actually engraving. So with that, I would recommend that you use the alcohol-based inks rather than the acrylic. A good runner-up if you're on a budget and not worried about water. The acrylic is okay, but I still think the alcohol ink is going to be the easiest to do.